housekeeping and how the session will run today. So again, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Abbas Mahmood. I'm Head of Data and Digitalization here at the Energy Networks Association. In terms of, I'll give a quick word on how the session will run today. So in terms of the session itself, we will start by setting the scene from a regulatory and system perspective, and then we'll move into three practical areas. So we'll look at widening access to network data, we'll look at ensuring consistency and compliance across data, and improving interoperability between the networks. So we have a number of speakers across the UK electricity networks that will present on those respective areas. So each speaker will focus on tangible changes and what is happening on the ground. A bit of housekeeping before we begin. So all microphones are muted, just to avoid background noise. The session is being recorded, so cameras can be off if you do not wish to be recorded. And also, can you please post your questions in the chat as we go? When you do, just let us know who the question is for, and we'll hopefully go through a few of those questions at the end. So in terms of diving straight in, so next slide, please, Sophie. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm Abbas Mahmood. I'm Head of Data and Digitalization. So today's session is about energy networks in the digital age, and more importantly, it's what that means in practice. So the UK energy system in the UK is changing fast. It's become decarbonised, it's decentralised, and it's increasingly more digital. And data ultimately sits at the centre of that transition. And when we get this right, we reduce data duplication, we create data efficiencies, and we can sort of align on common data standards, lower costs, and ultimately unlock system-wide value. So over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, the pace of change has accelerated significantly. So that urgency is why ENA and its members are working in a far more coordinated and collaborative way. So through the Data and Digitalization Steering Group, or the DDSG, the ENA are providing an industry forum to create structure, alignment, and a shared direction across the networks. So the DDSG brings together network companies, it brings together the system operators, policy colleagues, and with a clear focus on delivery. So these are not sort of isolated initiatives, but they're solutions that work across the networks, open the system up to sort of a wider energy sector. So today is a snapshot of that journey so far, where we are now, how far we've come, and some of the pathways in terms of looking forward. So with that, I'll hand over to Liam Bennett from Ofgem.
Hi there, good afternoon everyone, and yeah, good sorry for the difficulties. So I head up the energy system digitalization team at Ofgem, and we've been responsible for setting a lot of the policies you may have seen kind of suffusing the energy sector over the last few years around data best practice or consumer consent or the data sharing infrastructure. And hopefully I'll give you a kind of sense of why that urgency is so important and why coordination is so important to help us deliver urgency over the coming years. But we have the net zero 2050 requirements in legislation and clean power 2030, and digitalization absolutely will allow us to hit those targets in the most cost effective way possible. So we have a more complex energy system than we had 5-10 years ago. And that complexity is driving the need for digitalization to reduce system cost and to boost participation in the energy system. We think digitalization helps lower those costs of a modern digital energy system, one, by allowing flexibility with consumer access, by improving visibility and control of the energy networks, so real-time automation of those systems, that investments that have been made over the last sort of 5-10 years, and by making sure that existing system operations can be done in the most cost-effective way possible, reducing that waste, making sure network planning is targeted and allows for network build, but also making sure that operation is done in a way that benefits consumers by driving down costs and delivering them better services. I think the biggest barrier in the way of effective digitalization at the moment is coordination between digital activities, and it's something that ourselves and DESNZ, the department, have committed to solving. So we have a digitalization vision that is upcoming in Q1 this year, and there we'll be outlining sort of a framework for how digitalization should progress to help us meet Clean Power 2030. But we think that will drive down costs of digitalization, although it will, incur some initial upfront costs. So if I could have the next slide, please. So if I think about what are the key priorities of the energy system today, the stage of the transition we're at, for me, I think about strategic planning, I think about connections, and I think about how those two things integrate into the network price controls, how we fund those activities and the changes to them. I think about how our market landscape is evolving from having just kind of wholesale markets, retail markets, and some balancing markets to ones that are new due to the new technologies we have available to us, including flexible assets for all the way from households up to a transmission level. And I think about it in terms of how the consumer interacts with this more complex energy system. So I think we need to be thinking about this as both an opportunity and a risk. There is an opportunity that has not previously existed for consumers to benefit from the way they heat their homes or power their homes. But there are risks in terms of how that complexity is presented to them. And we need to try and find a way to use digital technologies to make that journey as smooth but as profitable as it can be for consumers. And all of that is underpinned through open data and digital infrastructure. You're going to hear some excellent progress that's been made so far on open data from the energy networks and data that hopefully you're all using in your business operations. But equally, we're going to think about digital infrastructure as well, and shared digital infrastructure that we think is an essential part of a digitalized energy system and allows you to manage those complex interlinking systems. So for the next slide, please. So as I said, complexity is increasing in the energy system. We think that's driven by just the number of assets that are starting to participate in that system, right? We're going from hundreds to sort of low thousands of generating assets to tens of thousands upwards, if you include all of the kind of low scale flexible assets in the energy system. Those new participants are interacting with each other and with legacy participants in ways that we didn't anticipate necessarily, or ways that are novel. If everyone, sorry, could just go on mute, just thank you. And unfortunately, that is leading to increasing risks to the stable operation of the energy networks because of a lack of visibility of how those assets are behaving in real time. And so these are all things that we're trying to address through our sort of upcoming network price control processes. But we think we will solve these issues and we will be able to manage this complexity if we address these 5 key challenges. The first is around data access, which we think is currently inconsistent. There's been good progress on open data. We need better progress in particular on more restricted data. We need to manage the critical national infrastructure risks that come from a greater availability of data. We create more surface area for attack. That surface area has to be protected effectively. But understanding there is economic opportunity there to capitalize on. There is a lack of interoperability in energy data at the moment. We are going to hear today about some great work around the long-term development statement, among others. But there is generally, I would say, a lack of interoperability, and that is making it more difficult for data users and those who want to generate novel services in the sector from being able to do their function effectively. And we need to make sure that is driven forward rapidly and consistently. Smart meter data, whilst not necessarily directly relevant to this conversation today, is an important one for us. Consumers have paid for the rollout of smart meters, and smart meter data is a huge asset to them and allows them to engage with new services in the sector. At the moment, they do not have, they are not realizing those benefits in the way we expect them to. And finally, we need to address the skills gap. We have a big skills gap at the moment with digitalization of the sector. There are a limited number of skills in this space, and there are lots of sectors, lots of people who are interested in obtaining them. We need to make the power system and the energy system the most attractive place for people to come and leverage those digital skills and work on the net zero challenge. So if we address those 5 key challenges, I think we can hit those requirements for a digitalized energy system. If I could have the next slide, please. So what are we doing, I suppose, in Ofgem in 2026? So we still think we have a digital foundation to build. There are lots of interesting dynamic things happening in the sector, but some of those fundamental capabilities across our licensees, but also across the wider system, don't exist there, whether that be data is not currently being collected or whether that's the right processes aren't in place to make that data available. And we're working with industry and we're working with government and the appropriate bodies to work out how we can manage some of those risks around privacy and critical national infrastructure risks. So we're trying to make sure that data exchange can be done in a streamlined way. We're trying to identify what we think the most important use cases are in the energy system. We touched on a few earlier around flexibility, strategic planning, connections. And then governance, we think, is a very important part that wouldn't naturally evolve from interactions between industry players, and that the regulator has a role in setting out how do we govern digital infrastructure in the sector and how do we govern access and availability. So if I can have the next slide, please. So that leads us, I guess, to the topic for today, which is industry collaboration. And urgency is a tricky one because it's safer sometimes when you have a sense of urgency to go into your shell to some extent and deliver the services and processes that your business needs without thinking about how that interacts with the wider industry. So we're really pleased to see the ENA, I think, grapple with how it brings together electricity networks to drive that industry collaboration forward at pace to match the needs of the sector. What we're seeing, I think, from the DDSG at this point and from the ENA is great work on data standards. We think it's really important that we as a sectoral regulator don't necessarily set every data standard for the sector. We think that would slow down processes quite significantly. So we need industry to drive that forward. And that only happens if you have effective collaboration and leadership. We've seen industry collaboration really drive technological change across the economy over the last 30 to 40 years, particularly in telecoms, where we've had sort of larger businesses come together to drive certain standards. We think the ENA has a really interesting role to play when it comes to data best practice. And for those who don't know, this is a license obligation that Ofgem put on the energy networks to better categorize, share, store, and make available their data. So it's those 11 principles that you can see on the slide here. We just put out a decision today that requires the data communications company to follow data best practice, and shortly the rest of the kind of organizations participating in industry codes to comply with data best practice, so sort of the next few years. As these new organizations are kind of exploring how data best practice applies to them and what does it mean, you know, the energy networks have been utilizing data best practice and complying with it for 4.5 years at minimum, some a little bit less than that, but they can share their learnings and help accelerate digitalization of some of those new entities who are coming within the data best practice sphere. And it's really important, I think, to finalize here is say there is a risk that we duplicate lots of activities in the sector if we don't engage with each other and collaborate with each other. And I think part of the activities you've heard of today, you're going to hear about today, are saying that we've identified where some of that duplication was and we've fixed it. And I think that's what we want to see. We want to see the energy networks collaborating. We want to see you collaborating with the energy networks, with Ofgem. And I think that's how we move towards a kind of coordinated digitalization of this energy system and driving kind of that change we want to see for Clean Power 2030 and to reach net zero. So hopefully you all enjoy the rest of today's session. And I think I'll hand over now to some of the energy networks to really go through the kind of progress they've made over the last 12 to 18 months. So thank you.
Great, thanks Liam. That's really helpful to have you set the scene for us. Could I have the next slide, please? So hello, I'm Kirsty. I'm here with my colleagues Becky and Natalie to provide an overview of the refreshed data triage and metadata management playbook. I want to start by giving a little bit of background. The original playbook was created in 2021. It certainly served industry well, but the DDSG members recognise the pace of change, especially in the last few years. Different networks have different risk appetites and operate in varied contexts. We need to evolve this approach to ensure that it reflects today's threats. Market conditions and user expectations also need to be taken into account. The landscape has evolved, regulation, technology, and expectations from our consumers has changed, so our approach needs to evolve too. We set out to build on the original playbook. As I say, this served industry really well, retaining its good foundations while adding the clarity, structure and the controls that we now require to reflect the changing environment. Next slide, please, Sophie. So really helpful that Liam's just set out those licence obligations on us as networks. And it's fair to say that Ofgem's best practice guidance is central to how we operate. It frames data as an asset that should serve customers, stakeholders and the public interest. And it sets out clear expectations for quality, accuracy, accessibility and governance. A key point is Principle 11, presumed open. We start from the assumption that data should be available unless there's a justified reason not to, such as commercial sensitivity or because it relates to critical national infrastructure. At the same time, we're obliged to catalogue our data, and the chosen standard is the Dublin Core Metadata Standard. This makes assets discoverable and consistently described, and Becky will cover this in more detail shortly. To clarify, this is the balance that we're striking: openness where appropriate, but protection where necessary. Next slide, please. Thank you. So security is a non-negotiable. Our network is aligned with the NIS directives for operators of essential services and supported by Ofgem's SPAR requirements, which relate to security, privacy and resilience. The updated approach in the playbook strengthens the internal triage process that we all follow, so that we can open data confidently without compromising cybersecurity, privacy, commercial risks or regulatory obligations. It's about applying the right control to the right asset at the right time. Next slide, please, Sophie. So the Data Triage Working Group works alongside the other ENA groups, which you'll see on the left of this slide. Data Licensing, which is the Scottish Power Energy Networks, Standards Interoperability and SIM, led by UK Power Networks, Metadata Standards, led by SSE and Transmission, Engagement and Coordination, led by Northern Power Grids, and Open Data, led by UKPN. We, as a team from the data management team at SSE and Transmission, agreed to lead the Triage Playbook refresh. We issued a request for consultancy, evaluated responses and gathered feedback across all of our network peers. And collectively we selected Zilke to facilitate workshops and help shape the new playbook. This results in a highly collaborative process with clarity on deliverables, ownership and timelines. Next slide, please. So our objective was to update the ENA playbook using insights from working group sessions and to ensure consistent data classifications, while also recognising that each network has a different risk appetite. We focused on improving the narrative structure and tone, clarifying ambiguous areas identified by the group, and creating alignment across companies so that all data users experience a streamlined triage process regardless of the network they're engaging with. In practical terms, we captured and synthesised the key points, resolved ambiguities and delivered a refreshed playbook ready for adoption. Natalie will now provide an overview of how the sessions were structured as well as the key outputs. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Kirsty. We ran 4 working group sessions hosted by Zilke to discuss proposed changes, capture feedback. Drafts were circulated, feedback was invited and acted on, and crucially we've incorporated the outputs from the Metadata Standards Working Group to reduce fragmentation and aid adoption. Next slide, please, Sophie. The updated version has some new notable features which I'll cover in more detail on the next slide. At a high level, the playbook now expands into metadata management and cross-organisational governance, so we can describe and manage our assets uniformly. We've introduced a standardised triage framework, sensitivity analysis and risk assessment to make decisions repeatable and evidence-based. It reflects evolving threats and regulatory requirements, ensuring that we stay aligned with Ofgem's guidance and our net zero commitments as a business. In short, everything is more structured and better documented and designed for consistency. Next slide, please, Sophie. I'll just take you through some of the key changes so you can see what's new and why it matters. In terms of the scope and purpose, as mentioned previously, the updated version adds metadata management, governance and formal risk assessment with explicit alignment to Ofgem. It also introduces structured stages around probability impacts, impact frameworks, sensitivity analysis, protection against composition attacks and multiple mitigations where we need it. Roles and responsibilities, there's now example role descriptions, and this maps to skills maps skills to process stages and makes accountability far clearer. We've now explicitly embedded Principle 11, the presumed open principle, while documenting where exceptions are warranted. We define required metadata elements and detailed instructions for interoperability and compliance. And the decision flows and risk visuals make application much more intuitive. It's really the practical detail that lets teams implement consistently. Just hand over to Becky, who's going to cover the outputs of the metadata working group. Can you get next slide, please, Sophie?
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Natalie. So in parallel with the work that was going on in the data triage working group, I was heading up our standards and interoperability metadata working group. And the purpose of that group was really to allow DDSG members to work collaboratively and try and develop a guidance document that ensured alignment between organisations in terms of how we describe our data, how we store it, and how we work towards delivering against principles 2, 3, 5 and 8 of Ofgem's data best practice guidance, which are noted on the left there. In terms of scope, we set out to review and align on the interpretation of compulsory Dublin core terms and to evaluate any non-compulsory Dublin core and non-Dublin core terms the networks were adopting or felt would be beneficial for future, so that as we continue to develop our internal and external facing catalogues, we're using a common language and common vocabulary across the board. In addition to that, we also set out to review relevant metadata sub-properties and to establish, as I say, a controlled vocabulary for each of the properties, ultimately producing a standards and guidance document that could be followed by anybody who wanted to. Next slide, please, Sophie. So we initially set out in 2 phases from throughout the course of 2025. Yes. First to work through the terms, aligning on the definitions and adoption. And then the second phase, similar to the playbook refresh, the plan was to bring in a consultancy to try and assist with the creation of a guidance document based on the research and the work that we'd done. We did have a budget to cover this, however, as the data triage playbook was reaching its final stages and the bulk of the work had been done in terms of aligning on metadata terms, sub-properties and so on, we floated the idea of how it would be if we combined the two to have everything in one central location for users. And that's what we decided to do moving forward. So at no extra cost to the networks, we were able to integrate the output from the metadata working group into the playbook, and this was published into the final data triage and metadata management playbook. And yeah, that really just ensured consistency and ease of access for users, that you were looking at one document rather than having to locate 2 different publications from 2 different times. Next slide, please, Sophie. So in terms of next steps and where we go from here, we've linked the updated version of the data triage and metadata playbook on the slides for you to access, or you can access it via the ENA's website under publications. Throughout 2026, the UK security authorities will review this version that's been published. They'll provide commentary in line with the review of data best practice guidance and the UK network operator licence conditions. The outputs from this will then form the basis for the next version of the playbook, which will be updated by the DDSG members through late 2026 into 2027. And we do see this as a continually rolling, moving document as the risk profiles change, as we continue to learn more, as we understand more about what our stakeholders are wanting and what we value moving forward. So yeah, thank you for listening. I'll now hand over to Kirsty Toithia at SP Energy Networks to discuss widening access to network data.
Thank you, Becky. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you can all see and hear me okay. There was a few issues when I joined the call, so I've done the famous log off, restart, hope, drag some colleagues into the call who are desperately hoping that you can also see and hear me so they don't have to speak on my behalf. But if there is any issues, please let me know. So firstly, yeah, thank you so much for inviting me along today to speak to you all about the work that the UK network operators, including SP Energy Networks, have been leading to widen access to our network data. As the previous speakers have just outlined, the UK... Oh, sorry, Sophie, if you could just jump onto the first slide, actually. Thanks so much. So yeah, so as the previous speakers have just outlined, the UK network operators have been on a journey to widen access to our network data, shaped by Ofgem's data best practice guidance. The challenges to do this have been significant. To be able to do it effectively, we first truly needed to understand what data it is that we hold, how it can be shared. We needed to develop the right technology to support that data sharing, create clear terms of use, and ensure that every stakeholder, no matter what network operator they're engaging with, has the same consistent service. But perhaps most importantly, we had to embed robust governance and security frameworks within our organisations. And this is where the concept of the data spectrum, developed by the Open Data Institute, has proven essential for us. It's given us a real structured way to assess our data and determine the appropriate controls for sharing it. So, as SSA Transmission have just outlined, by adopting a data triage framework, we can now systematically evaluate our data against the data spectrum, making informed decisions about what can be shared, with whom, and under what conditions. This approach is helping us move the industry forward together. If you can just move on to the next slide, please, Sophie. Thank you. So Ofgem's data best practice guidance sets out a clear expectation that energy data should be treated as presumed open and shared openly unless there is a justifiable reason or compelling reason as to why not. But in practice, it's not always that simple. So we have open data, which is freely available for anyone to use, access, or share. There is another set of data that can be shared, but only with certain restrictions and specific terms of use. And at the other end of the data spectrum, we have some data that is closed, that needs to be kept within our organisations to protect privacy, commercial interests, or security. Our collective direction as an industry is to create open data portals and publish data sets for all to use and access under a common licence. But we quickly realised that for data classified as shared, there was no standardised or widely accepted approach or licence. And this gap made it difficult to collaborate and innovate, and it created uncertainty for our stakeholders about how shared data could actually be used. By defining our data against the data spectrum, we're able to clarify what can be shared openly, what needs to be protected, and where a more nuanced approach is needed. And this clarity is essential for building trust and driving progress. If you could just jump to the next slide, please, Sophie. Thank you. So now let's talk about shared data and why it matters. Shared data requires a more nuanced approach to balancing transparency, innovation, and security. Some datasets contain network-sensitive information, and unrestricted public access just simply isn't appropriate. Shared data frameworks allow us to provide controlled access so that stakeholders can still use valuable data, but without compromising security. This isn't just about transparency, it's also about collaboration. So by sharing data under agreed terms for specific uses and with defined timeframes, we enable deeper partnerships between network operators, suppliers, technology firms. But this also means that we need more extensive governance structures, ensuring that every use of shared data is trusted and accountable. The industry's agreement on the need for a shared data classification is a big step forward. It helps us balance stakeholder needs with network security, enabling innovation whilst maintaining clarity and the trust as the energy landscape evolves. Next slide, please, Sophie. So, as our industry matured its approach to data sharing, it became clear that we needed a practical, standardised way to make shared data work for everyone. Ofgem's data best practice guidance already required all open datasets to be published under a common licence. But for data that falls into the shared category, there was a gap. There was no standard licence, no consistent approach, and I guess no clear path for collaboration across the network operators. To address this, the ENA brought together a dedicated working group under the Data and Digitalisation Steering Group with representatives from every UK network operator. We also engaged with external consultants to review current practices and gather insights from across the sector. Through a series of collaborative workshops attended by the legal experts from all network operators as well as their kind of subject matter experts, we worked together to define and agree on a standard set of terms for a shared data licence. The result was the publication of a new common shared data licence, and that was published and made available in September 2025. This licence is now being implemented across the industry, providing a consistent, robust framework for sharing data that can't be made fully open, but still holds significant value for innovation and collaboration. If you could just jump to my final slide, please, Sophie. Excuse me, take a sip of water. So the result of this collaborative effort is a common shared data licence that is now available for adoption across all UK energy networks. The licence provides a standardised approach for sharing shared energy network data. Importantly, is that it also still provides network operators with flexibility. On the front page, the licence details section allows data providers... Oh, sorry, somebody asking a question. Oh, okay, sorry. So the licence still provides network operators with flexibility. On the front page, the licence detail section allows data providers to clearly define the scope, specifying who can access the data, for how long and for what purpose. At the same time, the core set of standard terms is use case agnostic, meaning that it can be applied to a wide range of data types and scenarios. By lowering the barriers to accessing shareable network data, we're moving away from the old binary of open or closed and opening up new opportunities for collaboration, innovation, and system optimization. The licence is freely available for adoption, not just by energy networks, but other sectors as well. Ultimately, we believe this approach reduces legal uncertainty, supports interoperability between networks, and ensures that our stakeholders can unlock the value that they need from energy data, but really importantly, whilst maintaining the trust and security that our industry demands. So again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about the work that we've done. And I will now hand you over to Steve, who's going to talk about the piece of work on interoperability. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Hi everybody. So I'm Steve Mould. I work for UK Power Networks as their network data manager. I'm a member of ENA's DDSG, and I've been chairing the SIM part of the interoperability sub working group. So I just wanted to spend the next 10 minutes just really providing a high-level view of what the group has been doing for the last couple of years. So when I'm talking about interoperability, this is really in terms of the data publication, the sharing, and the integration of that data. And so we're using the IEC's Common Information Model to do that. So SIM is a huge and it's a complex subject. And so I'll just summarize it for the purposes of today as it's an internationally adopted standardized semantic information model which describes the electric power systems and the data that's exchanged between them. It provides a consistent, non-proprietary way to exchange power system data. It enables interoperability between applications such as network planning, operations, SCADA, and market platforms. And it's expressed as a UML model with defining objects, attributes, and relationships in the electricity domain. So Liam provided an introduction earlier about Ofgem's view of digitalization, and their intent is driven by that need for standardization, interoperability, whole system visibility, and just the general need to support energy system digitalization. In 2022, they published an open letter which stated that their regulatory approach and intent was to use SIM as the expected data standard for data-related license requirements and broader data exchanges in the energy industry. So that brings me on to the long-term development statement, which was selected selected as the first use case for that interoperability. So why was it selected? Well, the first thing is it's a regulatory requirement. The second is, for anybody who's not familiar with the LTDS, this is a way for the DNOs to share their data and information about their networks to external stakeholders. So by providing that information, it's acting as an enabler to facilitate the connection of low carbon technologies to the DNO's network. And so obviously that's helping support Britain's transition to net zero. This information has been provided for a number of years previously by the DNOs, but it wasn't always in the format that's most easy to digest. So anybody who has consumed this data knows the difficulty is piecing it together to get useful insight. And it wasn't necessarily consistent in terms of how it was published across the DNOs. Next slide, please, Sophie. So in terms of what the LTDS includes, so previously and currently, it is a series of tables that are published. So some of these tables describe the DNO's assets, so the circuits, the transformers, the switchgear. Some of the tables describe network behaviors. So these are kind of observed peak demand, true peak demand, and fault levels. And the remaining tables describe activity within that network, connection activity, so the generators that are already connected and those that are looking to connect to the network. So when we look at the SIM CGMES profile, there's quite a natural alignment between what the LTDS is sharing and what the CGMES profile can support. So CGMES is a profile that's been in use for many years by transmission operators across Europe. So it standardizes the data exchanges between those network operators. And so even though they cross many European countries, you get that consistency of information that's shared between them. Next slide, please, Sophie. So SIM is a technical, complex subject, so I'm not planning to go through this slide in detail, but effectively what the CGMES profile includes. So there's the equipment profile that shows the assets that are contained within the network and their connectivity. There's the geographic layer that shows where those assets are, and there's the diagram layer that then shows that network visually. There's information within CGMES that supports load flow studies. So this comes from the short circuit, the steady state hypothesis, and the state variables profiles. And so between these profiles, what stakeholders are provided with is a granularity of information far beyond that was previously provided. It's a rich source of information, but most importantly, it's in a machine readable format. So the time it takes stakeholders to consume this is far less, and it's consistent in terms of the outputs that stakeholders receive. So they should be able to now combine all the DNO's LTDSs much more easily than they could do previously. Next slide, please, Sophie. In terms of the delivery of these, so the delivery has been staggered into stages. And so the first stage was delivered in November of last year. Effectively, this is a build over an 18-month period as the complexity of the ask increases. The maturity of the DNO's capabilities to produce this increases with it. And hopefully, the usefulness of these files increases as well to the stakeholders that are consuming them. So in November 2025, we published an EQ profile for a single GSP per license area, so grid supply point. And we used that publication to then validate that what we were publishing was in fact a valid EQ profile. Having learned from that and built upon that, the next stage, so May 2026, requires that we publish EQ profiles for the entire license areas, along with short circuit profiles. There's an LTDS specific profile being developed called SysCap. So this includes a lot of the information about capacity that's available on the network. We will also be publishing 5-year future models. So this is the EQ profile and the short circuit profile as of today, well, the day that it's published, along with 12-month snapshots for a 5-year period showing how that network will develop over those 5 years. And then in the May publication, there's also heat maps. So these are basically RAG statuses showing where there is capacity or where there perhaps isn't capacity on the networks in terms of like a geospatial visualization. And then moving on to stage 3. So stage 3 is where we publish the full CGMES equivalent profile. So this is all of those profiles that I mentioned earlier, the 5-year future models grow. So it's not just EQ and short circuit, it now includes the geographic layer. So in terms of how the group's capabilities have developed, so where it wasn't a simple case of just picking up CGMES and putting LTDS data into it. It was a case of developing the profile to fit the data exchange requirements that we have. So that involved adding to CGMES. So these were extensions that we added to that CGMES profile. So this may be the addition of new asset classes. It may be the addition of new attributes within existing asset classes. We also had to remove some aspects of CGMES. These were deviations to that profile, and SIM has permissions within it. Some things are optional, some things are mandatory. So we had to change the permissions for some of those to get it to work for the LTDS. What we ended up with was an LTDS SIM profile based on the CGMES international standards. As we published it, we would use validation tooling to check that it was the correct schema, so that we aligned with that LTDS profile. And we would also use shackle constraints. So this was to check that the values within the file were actually reasonable, that they would fall within an expected range. And anything that sat outside of that range could be flagged through the shackle constraints. Next slide, please, Sophie. So in terms of what's next, so this is a journey. The sector is moving towards this interoperability and use of SIM. So currently there is a grid code modification that's being submitted related to the data exchanges between DNOs and NESO. So these are the week 24, week 42 and week 50 data exchanges. And the intention is that they will be done using SIM. So again, based on CGMES. In addition to that, so delivering the benefits that Ofgem originally sought with the LTDS in terms of consistency and accuracy. The same things will apply to these data exchanges, but in addition to that, the extent of the network boundaries that are included in the model will grow. The data within it, so the generators that are shown within those models, will also increase, and information about various model scenarios will be included. So again, it's the ease with which the data exchange takes place and the granularity and richness of the information within those data exchanges is increasing as well. In terms of managing how this develops, so initially it was done through the technical SIM working group, which was part of the ENA. That was never going to be sustainable long term. So in order to coordinate the development of the SIM profiles, firstly for the LTDS, secondly for GC0139, there needs to be some kind of coordination and governance. So BSI have been contracted to provide that. So the first thing that they're doing is they are managing a SIM advisory group. So this is a mechanism to connect the GB SIM users with the IEC SIM community and to govern the direction that any GB SIM related activities take. Ultimately, it would be great to have a GB SIM that covers all of the known use cases that we have. The second part of what BSI are delivering is a SIM engagement hub. So this is effectively like a window into the activities that are underway. So it gives stakeholders that are interested in SIM visibility of the various activities that are underway, an opportunity to engage with them and feed back to them, and also a single source where they can go to for SIM related artifacts that are being published. So thank you. That's everything I wanted to cover today. I'll hand back to, I think, David.
Hi guys, no, that'll be me now. Sorry, slight change, but no. So yeah, that's a wrap from our presenters today. So yeah, I just want to say, start by saying thank you to all our speakers for their time and contributions today. Hopefully, the session has sort of shown the quality of insight across the sector and how things have sort of moved on. It also shows that digitalization is now core to how sort of the energy system functions, and it's not just a future ambition anymore. In terms of some of the progress we saw over the last 12 to 18 months, we just thought the networks cover off how they're sort of widening access to network data in a consistent, trusted way, putting clearer governance sort of around data triage, sort of metadata and compliance with Ofgem's expectations, and then also moving towards genuine interoperability so that network data can be used across network boundaries I think it's also clear that ENA's DDSG role will continue to maintain that system-wide view, align delivery, and ultimately support network collaboration. So I guess the focus going forward is implementation, it's adoption, and sort of continued collaboration across the sector. Next slide, please. So we did have a Q&A, but unfortunately, no questions came in. So it looks like no questions came in. So I'm assuming that I'll take that as a sign that the session has been clear and covered the grounds people were sort of interested in. But if you do have any questions after the session, feel free to follow up via the ENA team, the digitalization email that sent the meeting invites out. So in terms of just a final closeout, again, I just want to thank all our speakers for their contributions, and I want to thank everyone for joining today. It's been a great turnout, so that's been really, really positive. We've really appreciated your time and engagement, and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.